The Z3 is a budget in-ear monitor which claims to include every essential accessory, plus a dual driver design the company says fixes problems that other cheap earphones have. It's under $50, has a metal body, a detachable cable. The big question is whether they hold up for monitoring dialogue and editing a podcast, not just casual listening. I ran them through a listening test and compared them against other similar in-ear devices to help you decide if they're worth the money. Zhu Audio sent these to me for review. This is my take, not a sponsored video. They don't see this before it goes up, and they don't have any say over what I say. So let's get started. In all transparency, Zhu Audio did send these to me for review, but this is my actual take, not a sponsored video. They don't see this before it goes live, and they don't have any control over what I say. The Z3 is a metal body budget in-ear monitor with a detachable, replaceable cable aimed at the budget monitoring and listening crowd. I'll evaluate them in two ways: for monitoring dialogue and editing, and for just casual music listening. The company behind these is, and I hope I don't butcher the pronunciation, Zhulinniao, which means bamboo forest bird in Chinese. They sell under a few names. Zhulinniao is the domestic name in China. BirdDance is another name that they use, and you'll also see Zhu Audio on the product itself. Same company, and the Z3 belongs to what they call their Bamboo Forest series. Zhu Audio sent a list of things they wanted me to mention in this video. This comes from their marketing team, not from me, so take it for what it's worth. They point to a dual dynamic driver setup, which they claim solves the common frequency imbalance issue in same price single dynamic driver earphones, and delivers clearer instrument positioning and richer sound details. They pair that with what they call a dual chamber acoustic system, two independent chambers with a physical crossover splitting the sound. The drivers are a 10mm bamboo fiber silk diaphragm paired with a 6mm PU and PEAK composite diaphragm. The housing is full metal CNC die cast with a matte or mirror finish, and the branding is engraved into it. The cable is a 0.78mm dual pin detachable 106 core silver plated. They mention the accessories too. It comes with 3 sets of tips, a couple of memory foam tips, and a canvas carrying case. And they frame the package as high on cost performance. Their marketing pushes the value angle. They call it the $29 audio revelation and an underrated audio masterpiece. And they say that it competes with $100 flagship earphones at a $30 price. Their line is that their BirdDance Z3 redefines the budget level audio experience. Their words, not my opinion. Now that we've got that housekeeping out of the way, let's move on with the rest of the review. Inside the box, you get 3 different types of tips and 3 sizes each, and you get the detachable cable. The marketing calls this every essential accessory. One thing missing, though, is there's no 1/4-inch adapter. If you're plugging into an interface or a headphone amp, that's the one that you'd need. So much for their claim of having every essential accessory. The cable itself, it has a clear plastic casing or housing. It feels durable, though it just feels cheaper than the cable on the PME-20s that I reviewed earlier. The detachable design is a plus at this price point, since the cable is the most common thing to fail on these types of in-ear headphone, or I guess monitors, earbuds, whatever you want to call them. So having a detachable cable means you can easily replace that when it fails instead of having to replace the entire unit. One thing to be aware of is that the tips are very difficult to get on. I ran into this with the PME-20s as well because they're really thin silicone, so trying to get them to fit over the shaft without folding onto themselves, it's a bit of a challenge. But once they're on, and everything's fine. The isolation, once you do manage to get the tips on, is pretty good, which is always helpful when you're recording or working somewhere noisy. The metal body, it's solid, but it can get a little uncomfortable over longer sessions. Not really painful, but just my ears would get a little bit sore. If you monitor for a few hours at a time, that does add up. Despite what the marketing says, these are very much your typical cheap in-ear monitors. They're very colored, they're very tuned. The tuning runs warm, and the highs and the upper mids they're definitely rolled off. I don't care about the price point. What I care about is how they sound, and I just don't like the sound of these. Everything sounds a bit dull, or maybe not quite muffled, but dull. On voices, this means you lose clarity and the higher frequency detail that makes the voice sound true to the source. The rolled off high end does reduce harshness, and there are situations where that helps. Things like an overly bright mix or heavy sibilance, aggressive hi-hats. Those types of things all get tamed. Most of the time, though, that warmth just seems to subtract from the audio. It takes away from the clarity of the vocal and the other high frequency detail that I want to hear when I'm listening to music. On the noise floor, there's a bit of a slight hiss through my Universal Audio Apollo, but it is a lot less noticeable than the PME-20s gave me. Let me pause things here real quick and ask that if you're getting something out of this video, take a second to give it a like. It helps these reviews reach other people who are trying to figure out what's worth buying. Compared to the PME-20s that I did recently review, I prefer the sound of the PME-20s. They come across more true to the music and the test material I ran, where the Z3's warmth just shaves off too much of that high end. For music on the go, the PME-20s, the tuning is just more to my taste. The Z3 does come out ahead in terms of noise, but the PME-20's cable, it just feels like a step up in build quality. And I'll link to the PME-20 review in the corner, this corner, I think, and in the description as well. So who are these for? For monitoring dialogue and casual listening, they'll get the job done, but they're not really suited for any kind of mixing duties. The rolled off high end and the warmth, that frequency tilt, they just mean these aren't accurate enough. If you want something flatter and more true for mixing, I'd point you to the Ollo Audio X1 for a flat headphone. And I'll link to those in the description. But regardless of what the marketing says, all that matters is how they sound. And like I said earlier, I just don't like the sound of these. They sound like a typical cheap colored in-ear monitor. And while the tuning might make them less fatiguing, less harshness and whatnot, the music suffers from those missing frequencies. Everything sounds a bit dull, and that's just not my thing. It might make them great for podcasts, though. So what about you? Are you using budget in-ear monitors? Which ones? Do you like them? And what are you using them for? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.